She was the rejected blind Omega, stumbling through a world that never saw her worth, until fate tripped her into the arms of the Alpha King himself. But instead of casting her aside, his silence shattered, his touch lingered, and his next move shocked the entire pack. What secret bound the king's broken soul to hers, and why was she the only one who could set him free? The hall was alive with noise. Coins clinked, boots scraped, and laughter rolled like thunder. But to Lyra, the world was not sound, it was song. Every heart, every breath, every whisper carried a rhythm. She stood barefoot on the wooden auction block, trembling. The boards beneath her feet groaned, their voice tired and worn. Her uncle's hand gripped her arm too tightly. His voice cut across the hall, sharp and greedy. "Strong," he announced, pulling her forward. "Obedient." He jerked her chin so the crowd could see her pale eyes. "Silent," he added with cruel satisfaction. A ripple of laughter followed. To them, she was broken. To him, she was prophet. Lyra kept her head bowed. Her world was not their jeers, but the music of their souls. The crowd pulsed with harsh rhythms. Lust, hunger, mockery. Every beat stabbed at her chest. Her uncle's soul was worse, a rasping dirge, endless and greedy. He had raised her not as kin, but as burden. Now he sold her as one might sell a cow. Lyra's hands curled at her sides. She wanted to scream. But her voice had been taken long ago. Once, she had sung like her mother. Once her voice had lit fires, warmed hearts. Then the accident came. Smoke, a collapsing roof, a wound in her throat. The song was silenced forever. Her clan, the Stone Peak Pack, revered song as power, and when her voice was gone, their respect died with it. She became the useless child, the silent one. Now she was to be auctioned to the highest bidder. The bidding began, clumsy and cruel. "2 coins," a man jeered. "3, to silence my wife with her," another laughed. Lyra flinched as the chance rose. The rhythm was mocking, hollow, pitiful. She shut her eyes. She wanted to vanish. Then, a sound that was not a sound entered the hall. Silence. It swept through like a storm. The crowd hushed, shivers running down their spines. Even her uncle faltered. Lyra's breath it was not silence as mortals knew it. It was a void, vast and crushing, a silence so heavy it sang in its own way, and at its center, a single shattered note. It rang within Lyra's chest like broken glass, sharp, painful, beautiful. Her head lifted, though she could not see, her soul strained toward it. The source entered the hall. The king. Kaelen, the silent king of the north. The weight of his presence pressed on the room. No voice welcomed him. No laughter dared stir. His steps were measured, steady, carrying grief like armor. Lyra's uncle stiffened, sweat breaking across his brow. "My lord," he stammered, but the king said nothing. He had not spoken in years. Beside him, Malachi, the advisor, smiled with lips that carried no warmth. His soul was hunger, endless, echoing hunger. It was not music. It was a void that devoured music. He stepped forward, voice smooth and cold. "The king has need of a quiet servant," Malachi announced. 10 gold pieces. Gasps rose from the crowd. 10 gold for a useless girl? Her uncle's greed flared. His soul song rattled like coins in a jar. 50, he demanded. The crowd muttered, shocked. No servant was worth such price. But Malachi's smile only deepened. The pouch of coins clinked. 50, he agreed. The deal was struck. Her uncle's hand shoved her forward. Lyra stumbled, catching herself on the rough boards. Her uncle whispered into her ear, his breath sour with triumph. "You fetch more broken than whole." She did not reply. She could not. But in her heart, she listened. The shattered king's melody still rang in her chest. It was agony wrapped in silence. It was sorrow sharpened into a blade. And though she trembled, she felt something new, hope, because within that broken note she had heard a truth. He was not empty. He was not gone. He was trapped. The guards seized her arms. Chains rattled around her wrists. The Crosa would began to mutter again, emboldened after the shock. Blind. Worthless. A king's whim, nothing more. Lyra lowered her head, her pale eyes clouded and unseeing, but within, her soul leaned toward it. The storm of silence. Toward the king whose grief sang louder than the jeers. The hall faded. The chants dulled. All that remained was that broken, beautiful note. It was the first sound in years that did not hurt her. Instead, it called her. The journey began there, with chains on her wrists and silence in her throat. The king turned, his cloak brushing the floor. The crowd parted as he moved. Kaelen did not look at her, but his silence looked enough. It swallowed her whole. And in that silence, Lyra made a vow. Though blind, though voiceless, she would find the song hidden in the stones of the world. She would find the truth buried in silence, and she would give the king back his voice, even if it cost her the last breath of her own. The chains were loosened at last, but their weight still lingered on Lyra's wrists. Her skin burned where the iron had rubbed raw. She flexed her fingers, as if to remind herself they still belonged to her. The door of her chamber shut with a heavy thud. The sound rolled into silence, deep and suffocating. The air inside the citadel felt colder than the night outside. Even the fire and the torches seemed dim, as though afraid to crackle too loudly. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders curled forward. Her heart thudded in her chest, a weak drum against the quiet. She listened. The silence was not empty. It had a pulse, a rhythm that pressed against her skin. The king's silence. It filled every stone of this place. She drew her knees to her chest and laid her chin on them. Her uncle's greedy laugh echoed in her memory. 50 gold pieces, more than she had ever been worth to anyone, but not to him. To him she had been a broken thing to be discarded. She shuddered and pressed her palms over her ears. It did nothing. The silence seeped through. It always did. Her eyes closed, blind though they were. Shapes of sound painted the darkness. Before her, the creak of wood, the flicker of fire, the faint hum of the wind curling around the castle walls. And beneath it, always beneath it, the king's melody, fractured, bleeding. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. The hours crept by. She did not sleep, not truly. Her body was weary, but her mind would not still. When dawn came, she felt it rather than saw it. A pale wash of warmth against her cheek, faint as a ghost. The door groaned open. Footsteps entered, heavy and deliberate. A man's presence filled the room. "I am Bren," the voice said, low and steady. She turned her head toward the sound. The rhythm of his soul was like stone, firm, grounded, but not cruel. "The king keeps his own counsel," Bren continued. "Speak when spoken to. Keep your eyes lowered. Do not draw attention." Lyra's lips pressed together. Her sightless gaze tilted downward, but her ears drank in every note of his voice. It carried loyalty, but also weariness. He was a man bound by duty, and that duty weighed heavily on him. "I will return at nightfall," he said. Then the footsteps retreated. The door shut once more, locking her inside. Silence reclaimed the chamber. Lyra pressed her palm against the stone wall. It vibrated faintly, as though the very citadel breathed. She imagined it exhaling the grief of its master, sighing with every stone. Time slipped strangely here. The day stretched, hollow and endless. A tray slid through the doorway. Bread, cheese, a flask of water. She ate little. Food tasted like ash when sorrow clung to the air so heavily. She curled onto the bed, listening. Somewhere in the distance, boots struck stone. Somewhere else, doors groaned on ancient hinges. But above all else was the king's silence. It weighed on her chest until she struggled to draw breath. Night came slowly. Shadows thickened until they smothered the room. The torches sputtered, burning low. Lyra sat upright, her hands gripping the blanket. That was when she heard it. The note. Broken, jagged, piercing the dark. It cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Her pulse quickened. The sound was close, closer than before. It came from the heart of the citadel. The throne room, perhaps. She rose from the bed, bare feet brushing the cold floor. Her hand found the wall, guiding her. Each step echoed faintly in her mind, a map drawn in sound. The corridor whispered as she moved. She passed doors heavy with secrets. She felt the hum of iron in the locks, the groan of wood in their frames. The silence grew denser as she walked. It pressed harder, as though warning her back. But the melody pulled her forward. Her chest ached with it, aching to be closer. She reached the end of the passage. A vast door loomed before her. The air trembled here. The silence was thick as storm clouds. Lyra rested her palm against the wood. It throbbed faintly, like a heart. She pushed, but it did not yield. Her breath shook. Her lips parted, and a sound slipped out, barely more than a hum. It was the lullaby her mother had once sung, soft, fragile, wordless. The melody trembled in the air, brushing against the silence. The citadel seemed to stir. The broken note within it shuddered, answering faintly. Her hum grew steadier. It was the only song she had left to give, the only way she knew how to reach him. The silence swelled suddenly, crashing against her like a wave. She staggered, hand clutching the door. But she did not stop. Her voice wavered, but she hummed on. And somewhere beyond the door, the king's shattered melody shifted. It bent toward hers, like glass straining toward light. The hum died in her throat as footsteps echoed behind her. The sudden rhythm jolted her. Her heart leapt. The silence broke apart with the sound of boots on stone. Someone was coming. She pressed herself back against the wall, breath caught in her chest. The footsteps drew nearer, deliberate and sharp. The air around her chilled. Malachi. Even before his voice filled the corridor, she felt the void of him, the hunger that devoured all sound. His words slithered like smoke. You wander where you should not. She clutched the wall for balance. The lullaby still rang faintly inside her chest, but his presence crushed it, tried to smother it. She lowered her head, hiding the tremble in her lips. The advisor moved closer, his steps unhurried, confident. The silence twisted under his control. The air thinned, and Lyra's knees weakened. He leaned close, his whisper scraping against her ear. The king's silence is sacred. Disturb it again, and you will not see another dawn. Her heart hammered. Her breath came shallow. But though her lips were sealed, her spirit whispered back, You cannot stop me. For even beneath his void, she still heard it. The broken note of the king, calling her. Malachi's presence lingered long after his footsteps had faded. The air still quivered with his warning, sharp as a blade. Lyra leaned against the wall, her breath unsteady. Her chest ached from the weight of his silence pressing down. She slid her hand along the cold stone, retreating back to her chamber. The lullaby still trembled faintly inside her, a fragile ember refusing to die. She curled onto her bed, clutching the blanket. Her lips pressed tight, but in her heart she hummed again. She had disturbed something in the silence tonight, and it had stirred an answer. Sleep came in fragments, restless and thin. When morning arrived, the citadel remained the same, cold, quiet, merciless. She was given bread and water again. She ate in silence, though her thoughts would not still. The memory of the king's shattered melody lingered. She could not banish it. It haunted her every breath. The hours dragged. No one came. The silence gnawed at her, seeping into her bones. By nightfall, she could endure it no longer. She rose once more, her bare feet whispering across the stone floor. Our hand found the door. She hesitated, heart racing, but then she slipped into the corridor. The torches burned lower tonight, their flames sputtering faintly. The passage stretched like a throat of shadows. Her fingers brushed along the wall, mapping her path. Her ears caught every sound, the faint drip of water, the creak of ancient beams, the flutter of bats beyond. But the melody, that broken note still called to her. It pulled her like a thread. Her steps carried her deeper, past guarded doors, past whispering corridors, until she stood once more at the vast door of the throne room. The air here was denser than anywhere else. The silence thickened, as though alive. She pressed her palm against the wood. The broken note within shuddered, as if aware of her presence. Her lips parted. The hum began, soft and trembling. The lullaby. The sound slipped into the silence like a drop of light into a cavern. Her body swayed with it, her eyes closing. The air shifted, the silence bent, the note within the throne room stirred, rising to meet hers. Her hum grew steadier, warmer. She felt it reach back to her, jagged but yearning. It was him, the king. Kaelen. He was listening. Her throat tightened, but she continued. The song wrapped around the broken note like a bandage. It did not heal, but it held. A sudden gasp filled the air, not hers, not Malachi's, a sharp inhale from within the chamber. Her heart froze. The door creaked. The silence within trembled violently. And then the heavy doors opened. A draft swept over her, cold and vast. She stumbled back, but her feet held. The silence crashed outward like a storm, and within it stood the king, Kaelen. His presence towered, fierce and unbearable. Her blind eyes lifted toward him. The shattered melody she had felt for days now burned like fire in her chest. It was jagged. It was furious, but it was alive. For a moment, nothing moved. She could not see his eyes, but she felt the weight of them on her. Her hum faltered. The lullaby broke into silence. The king's steps echoed across the stone, closer, stronger, until she could feel the shadow of him before her. Her breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then it happened. His hand gripped her wrist, not cruelly, not gently, but firmly, as though anchoring himself to her presence. The silence around him cracked. The broken note screamed inside her chest, sharp enough to draw tears. She flinched, but did not pull away. Her lips parted. Another hum rose, softer this time, a trembling echo of the lullaby. Kaelen froze. The note inside him shifted. For the first time, it did not sound broken. It sounded startled. His grip on her wrist tightened, just slightly. Then, a sudden eruption. The air split as a voice thundered from the shadows. Enough! Malachi. His steps echoed sharply, his void spreading like poison. The silence thickened until Lyra could scarcely breathe. Do not touch her! Malachi snarled. Lyra gasped as his hand struck through the air, reaching for her. But before the blow could land, it stopped. A stronger hand caught Malachi's wrist. Kaelen's. The king's. The silence shattered around them like breaking glass. Malachi's hiss tore through the air. You would defy me? Still, the king said nothing, but his body spoke. His grip was iron, his stance unyielding. Lyra's heart pounded. She heard the jagged melody surge inside him, breaking against its chains. For the first time, the silence no longer felt like his prison. It felt like his weapon. Malachi's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. She is nothing, blind, broken, worthless. Kaelen did not release him. The air pulsed, trembling around them. Lyra's breath shivered in her chest. The lullaby still trembled on her lips, though faint now, fragile as a dying flame. But even faint, it seemed to steady him. Malachi wrenched his arm free, his void spilling out in waves. His eyes burned, though she could not see them. His voice cut low, cold, and dangerous. This will end, one way or another. He retreated into the shadows, his presence dragging silence with him. The storm he left behind pressed heavy on her skin. But it was different now, because for the first time, the king had moved. For the first time, the king had chosen. His silence was no longer just sorrow. It was defiance. Kaelen released her wrist at last. She staggered, the ghost of his grip burning on her skin. Her lips trembled. Her throat ached. The lullaby faded into quiet once more. The king stood before her, tall and silent. His shattered melody still rang jagged in her chest. But now it carried something new. Something she had never heard from him before. A question. And though she could not see his eyes, she felt them piercing into her soul. The night after the confrontation weighed heavy on the citadel. The corridors whispered with unease, the guards shifting nervously, as though the stones themselves had felt the king's defiance. Lyra kept to her chamber, trembling at the memory of his grip on her wrist, the way silence itself had cracked under his hand. Sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the jagged music of Kaelin's soul, torn but alive. When dawn finally broke, pale and thin, she was summoned to perform simple tasks, fetching water, tidying cold chambers no one seemed to use. But even these small chores became unbearable under Malachi's shadow. His presence lingered at every corner, sharp as glass, and she could feel the emptiness that followed him like a parasite. It gnawed at her ears, drowning the world's hidden melodies. One afternoon, as she carried a jug of water across the courtyard, a firm hand brushed against her elbow. She stiffened, ready for Malachi's hiss, but instead a hushed voice whispered, "Not here. Keep walking." It was Bren, the captain of the guard. His tone was low, meant for her ears alone. Lyra obeyed, her blind step steady on the worn stones. He walked just behind her, his presence solid, protective. When they reached the quieter stretch beneath the ramparts, he leaned closer. "Yo, you've stirred something in him," Bren murmured, careful, cautious. She tilted her head, her lips parting in question, but he continued before she could speak. "The king's silence, it is not his own. It was forced on him." Her heart leapt at the words. She stopped in her tracks, gripping the jug tighter. Forced. She had felt it in the notes, but to hear it confirmed. Bren's voice dropped further like gravel pressed into the earth. "Malachi feeds on it. Whatever binds the king, it gives the advisor power. That is why no one dares defy him." Lyra's throat went dry. The lullaby she had hummed, the way Kaelen had reacted, it all sharpened in her mind. Her gift wasn't madness, it was truth. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered, voice breaking with fear. Bren hesitated. His boot scraped against the stone as he slowed his pace. "Because I've seen what happens to those who try to break Malachi's hold. They vanish. And after last night, he'll set his eyes on you." The warning sank into her bones like ice. Her hands trembled around the jug. Dispose of her. The words she did not hear yet knew were forming in Malachi's poisonous mind. That night, her chest ached with restless urgency. She could not sleep. The thought of Kaelen shackled by magic, bound by silence, gnawed at her heart. The king was not merely grieving, he was imprisoned, and she could hear the chains. Her lips brushed the blanket as she hummed again, so softly no ear but her own could catch it. The melody lingered in the air like a prayer, but the shadows stirred, restless. Somewhere in the depths of the citadel, Malachi moved like a serpent, whispering orders, weaving his venom. He had seen the way Kaelen had touched her wrist. He had seen the fracture in the silence. And now he could not allow her to remain. She was a thread unraveling his spell. Lyra's skin prickled as though the air itself had turned against her. The next morning, whispers curled through the corridors. Guards muttered of Malachi's fury, though none dared speak his words aloud. Lyra kept her head low, her blind gaze cast downward. But inside her, the fire burned. If Kaelin's silence was stolen, there had to be a way to return it. She thought of Bren's warning, his loyalty stretched thin against Malachi's poisonous reach. Perhaps there was more he dared not tell her in open halls. Her steps led her through the citadel's winding maze, ears tuned to the faintest vibrations in the stone. That was when she heard it, a faint rhythm, different from the others. Not a song of the living, but the hushed thrum of secrets, locked and buried. The library. She had passed its doors before, sealed with heavy chains, guarded by silence deeper than any other chamber. The forbidden place. Her heart thundered. If there were truths of stolen voices, of magic, of spells, they would be hidden there. Night descended once more. The castle slept in uneasy stillness, shadows stretching long across the corridors. Lyra slipped from her chamber, her steps softer than breath. The air smelled of smoke from dying torches, of damp stone and iron locks. Every turn of the corridor pulled her nearer to the forbidden library. She moved with her hands brushing the walls, ears straining for guards. The silence guided her, a hollow note vibrating faintly against the chained door. Her fingertips brushed the metal links, cold and rough. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She hummed, just barely, a thread of melody winding into the lock. The air shifted. The chains quivered, as though some unseen force shuddered at her song. Her hum grew steadier, the same lullaby that had shaken the king's prison of silence. And with a sound softer than breath, the lock clicked open. She froze, hardly daring to believe it. Then slowly, she pushed the door inward. The air inside was heavy, thick with dust and forgotten time. Shelves loomed high, their spines groaning under the weight of ancient tomes. Scrolls lay coiled in corners, brittle with age. Her pièces were cautious, her ears catching every creak of wood, every whisper of parchment. The silence here was not empty, it was waiting. Her hand trailed over the nearest shelf, fingers grazing cracked leather. She whispered the lullaby under her breath, letting its faint vibration lead her deeper. And then she felt it. A scroll, pulsing faintly against her hand, alive with a strange rhythm. She drew it free, the parchment dry and fragile. Her fingers traced the symbols inked upon it, but her gift heard what her eyes could not. The scroll sang. Its melody was faint, sorrowful, bound in layers of secrecy. She pressed it closer, listening with every fragment of her soul, and then the words unfurled, not on the parchment, but in her mind, a stolen voice, bound by song, the anchor of silence forged in deceit. Her breath caught, her knees trembled. The king's silence was not fate, it was theft, a theft that could be undone. But even as the truth surged through her, the air shifted violently. The void stirred, cold and venomous. Malachi's presence seeped through the stones, sharp as knives. He was awake, and he was coming. The scroll trembled in her hands, its melody whispering truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Her heart pounded against her ribs, every beat louder than the silence that wrapped around her. The words still echoed in her head, a stolen voice bound by song. She pressed the parchment close, almost afraid to breathe, afraid the truth itself might draw Malachi nearer. The void in the corridor thickened, his presence crawling like smoke beneath the door. She shoved the scroll back into the shelf, fingers shaking, just as footsteps brushed against the stone outside. The chains on the door rattled faintly, as if a hand tested them. Lyra pressed herself into the shadows, her breath caught in her throat. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence receded, sliding into the depths of the citadel. She stood there trembling, the silence so sharp it made her ears ring. When she finally returned to her chamber, dawn was already bleeding into the sky. The torches hissed low, their flames sputtering against the draft. She collapsed onto her bed, clutching the blanket, her mind racing. The king's silence was not grief, it was theft. And Malachi was feeding on it. She felt it now with clarity. The advisor's void was not his own. It was stolen. Every ounce of strength he displayed, every poisonous smile, came from the king's imprisoned voice. Later that day, The citadel stirred with its usual cold routine. Servants rushed about, guards paced, and still the halls felt strangled. Malachi walked among them like a shepherd, his words soft, his tone honeyed. To the people, he was a savior, guiding the kingdom in its silent king's stead. But Lyra could hear what others could not. Beneath his words, beneath the careful cadence of his steps, was the hollow pull of hunger. The silence he carried was no burden, it was a feast. And each time he lingered near the throne room, she felt it swell stronger. He was drinking from Kaelen's silence like a predator savoring its prey. That night, unable to resist, Lyra left her chamber once more. Her bare feet brushed the cold stone, her ears tuned to the fragile music of the world. The air shifted near the throne room, heavy with shadows. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden in the dark. Her heart thundered as Malachi's voice curled through the silence. "You are mine to keep broken," he whispered, though his words were meant for no one but the king. She heard the rustle of his cloak as he moved closer. Then the stillness fractured. The silence inside Kaelen pulsed violently, jagged and pained, and Malachi drank it in. She could hear the draining, a sickening rhythm that devoured the shattered melody. Her stomach turned, bile rising in her throat. It was not grief that hollowed the king. It was theft, night after night. The silence cracked again, but this time there was resistance. Ka. Ellen stirred. His steps echoed faintly, a shift of weight, a movement she had not heard before. The jagged melody pushed back, faint but defiant. Her lips parted in shock, her body trembling. For the first time, she sensed rebellion in him, a strength clawing upward through the chains. Malachi hissed softly, as though displeased. "Still you resist," he muttered. "Foolish. Hopeless." His footsteps retreated, his void trailing behind him like smoke. The throne room stilled once more. Lyra's breath shook. She pressed her back harder against the wall, her nails biting into her palms. The king had fought back. It was faint, fragile, but it was there, and he had not stopped watching her. She felt it now, in the way his silent melody bent toward hers, like a moth drawn to flame. The next morning, she was ordered to bring water to the upper hall. Her steps faltered as she entered the chamber, for she felt him near. Kaelen stood by the window, tall and silent, the faint scrape of his boots against stone betraying his presence. The air was tense, thick with unspoken things. She froze in the doorway, clutching the jug. Though her eyes were blind, she felt him glance at her. The shattered melody inside him shivered, raw but searching. She lowered her head, her pulse thundering, and set the jug down. The silence stretched long between them, yet it was not empty. It brimmed with questions neither of them could voice. The days that followed blurred into strange tension. Kaelen walked the halls at night, his steps echoing softly where once there had been none. Servants whispered of seeing him standing at the battlements, staring into the dark. The court wondered if their king was stirring back to life, but Malachi's voice quickly smothered their hope. He cloaked his poison in kindness, assuring the people that the king was merely restless, still grieving, still broken. Yet Lyra could feel his mask slipping. Each word he spoke bled with hunger. Each smile was stretched too thin, his silence growing bloated and heavy with stolen magic. One evening, as Lyra lingered near the library door, she felt the air shift violently. The void descended before she could retreat, curling around her like chains. Malachi's voice slid through the darkness, soft as silk, sharp as a blade. "You've been wandering where you shouldn't." She froze, her chest tight, her lips pressed together to hold back the trembling. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating, the silence inside him pressing against her ears until they rang. "You think I don't hear you?" he whispered. "You think I don't see the way he looks at you?" Her breath caught, her nails digging into her palms. Malachi's face hovered close, though she could not see it. His voice curved low, venom dripping from every word. "You are nothing but a broken girl with a dangerous song." The silence thickened, swallowing even the beat of her heart. And then he leaned closer, his whisper a blade against her throat. "If you sing again," he hissed, "you will die." Lyra stood frozen in the dark after Malachi's threat, her breath shaking, her pulse a storm beneath her skin. The echo of his venom, "If you sing again, you will die," still clawed at her chest, but deeper than fear, something else stirred, defiance. Her song was the only weapon she had, and he feared it. That alone was reason enough to keep it alive. The next morning, the citadel whispered of shadows moving, of the king walking again in the halls at night. Servants exchanged nervous glances, unsure if it was hope or dread. Bren found her in the courtyard, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. She stiffened, thinking for a moment it might be Malachi, but his voice came low, steady, and firm. "You're still alive." Her lips trembled, half a smile, half a wound. "Not for lack of trying," she whispered back. He exhaled through his nose, a sound of restrained frustration. "Malachi knows. He's circling closer. But I saw what you did. The king, he's different now." Her blind eyes lifted, searching his tone. "Different?" Bren's voice softened. "When you're near, he stirs. He fights." The truth of it tightened in her chest. She had felt it too, the way Kaelen's broken melody leaned into hers. That night, the throne room breathed with tension. The shattered silence within Kaelen shifted as Lyra entered, her hum trembling into the vast chamber. At first it was faint, a single note brushing against the jagged edges of his song, but then his melody reached back, struggling, aching, yearning for her. She stepped closer, her hand brushing the cold stone of the wall. Her humming deepened, weaving threads of sound through the cracks of his silence. The king stood at the far end, motionless, his shadow stretched long across the marble. But something in the air had changed. He was listening. Days turned into a rhythm neither Malachi nor the pack could explain. Lyra hummed when she could, in stolen moments, while pouring water, while passing through corridors, while standing too close to the throne. And each time, Kaelen shifted. At first, only his gaze. She could feel the weight of it, hot and piercing, resting on her though her eyes were blind. Then his hand moved once, catching a cup before it fell. Then his steps carried him toward the window at dusk. Each small act was rebellion, and each act fed the whispers that the king was waking. Bren saw it most clearly. He lingered at her side more often now, silent but loyal. His presence was a shield when Malachi's void pressed too close. "You're stitching him back together," he muttered one evening, his arms folded across his chest. Lyra tilted her head, listening. "I'm only humming." Bren's voice carried a rough edge. "And yet, stones that never cracked before are shifting." Her lips parted, a tremor of awe in her chest. Malachi felt it too. His smiles stretched thinner, his words colder. When he passed through the halls, his silence pressed harder, hungrier. But beneath it, there was unease. He could not stop the faint light that threaded through the darkness each time Lyra's song reached the king. The advisor's mask was cracking, though he wore it still. He spoke of loyalty to the pack, of guiding the kingdom through grief, of serving a broken king. But to Lyra's ears, every word was hollow, drained of truth. The people nodded, unaware, but she heard the feeding beneath his voice, the constant hunger. One evening, Kaelen stood when Lyra entered the hall. The scrape of his boots against the marble startled the guards. The silence that followed was so thick it trembled through her skin. Lyra's hum faltered, but then steadied. His shadow loomed closer, his presence strong, commanding. Malachi's hiss echoed from the corner. "You should sit, my king. The weight is too much." But Kaelen did not move. His gaze remained fixed on Lyra. Her humming deepened, soft as a prayer, steady as a heartbeat. The broken melody within him surged, jagged but alive, and for the first time it pressed back against Malachi's void. Bren's hand dropped to his sword. The guards shifted uneasily, sensing something they could not name. Malachi's silence flared, but the king's defiance held it at bay. It was not a roar, not a shout, but a silent rebellion stronger than any word. Lyra's hum wrapped around it, pulling the pieces tighter together. Her throat ached, her chest burned, but she would not stop. The air grew heavy. The throne room shuddered with an unseen force, the stones themselves vibrating faintly. Servants outside the hall whispered of a strange sound, not quite a song, not quite a storm. Inside, Lyra felt the broken melody stitching, fragment by fragment, beneath her voice. The lullaby grew stronger, resonating with the walls, filling the silence that Malachi had long devoured. And then it happened. A sharp crack split the air. She flinched, her hands clutched tight to her chest. The marble beneath her feet trembled, hairline fractures racing across the floor. The throne itself groaned, as if bearing a weight too long restrained. Gasps echoed from the guards. Bren's eyes widened, his hand gripping his sword tighter. Malachi's silence lashed out, desperate, but it could not smother the rising sound. The lullaby swelled like a tide, weaving with Kaelen's melody until the two became one. The walls trembled. Dust rained from the high ceiling, falling like ash. The cracks widened, pulsing with a faint glow, as though magic itself bled from the stones. Lyra staggered, her knees weak, but still she hummed, tears streaking down her face. Kaelen stood unyielding, his shadow vast, his silent defiance stronger than ever. The song had become a weapon, a force the citadel itself could not contain. And as the cracks spread across the throne room walls, one truth became clear. The prison was breaking. The council chamber had always been a place of heavy air, its stone walls thick with history and judgment, but that night, the weight pressing down on it was far darker. Malachi stood at the center like a serpent clothed in authority, his voice curling through the shadows. He spoke of treachery, of whispers behind locked doors, of dangerous songs that had no place within their kingdom. His words were honeyed, yet every syllable dripped venom. The council leaned in, their brows furrowed, their hearts swayed by his theatrics. Lyra stood at the edge of the chamber, her breath unsteady, listening to the way the council's soul songs shifted. Fear rang sharp in their notes, brittle and cutting. The melody of trust, which she had started to nurture within the pack, wavered and collapsed under Malachi's accusations. Each word he uttered pulled threads of doubt tighter around her. "Bewitchment," he said smoothly, letting the word hang like smoke in the chamber. "A blind girl weaving songs only the king seems to hear? A curse in our land." Murmurs rippled. She felt them like daggers, sharp whispers of witch, curse, danger. Kaelen rose from his throne, the silence that had long defined him now vibrating with rage. His body moved before his voice could follow, but the attempt alone sent a shockwave through the chamber. His eyes burned, fixed on Malachi, a silent vow etched within their fire. He tried, gods, he tried, to speak. His chest rose, his lips parted, but nothing came. Malachi's hand lifted, fingers curling as if plucking invisible strings, and Kaelen's jaw snapped shut. The king's silence, once a prison of grief, was now shackled chains Malachi used to humiliate him. Kaelen staggered back, the effort of resisting like a storm raging inside him. His silence deepened, thickened, and Lyra heard the fracture of his soul song scream through the hall. Her own voice trembled, though she did not dare sing. She whispered instead, "This is not what it seems. You know me. You've seen me." Her words fell into the tide of suspicion, drowned out by the crowd's muttering. Fear spread like fire through dry grass, catching on every weak heart Malachi had poisoned. Bren's steady presence in the corner was the only anchor she had. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, yet he stayed quiet, trapped between loyalty to the king and obedience to the council. She caught the flicker of his soul song, loyal, heavy, conflicted. Malachi stepped closer, his robes whispering against the floor. His smile was sharp, his voice silk wrapped around steel. "The girl has bewitched him. Look how he defies me for her. Look how silence itself strains against her influence. She is not hope. She is the beginning of ruin." The council nodded. Their voices rose in unison, a chorus of fearful agreement. Words like stones were hurled: dangerous, cursed, exile, dungeon. The air thickened, oppressive, as if the chamber itself believed the lies. Kaelen slammed his hand against the arm of his throne, the crack echoing, but it was not enough. He could not speak the truth. He could not break the spell. His silence, once mournful, had become his greatest weakness in that moment. Two guards stepped forward. Lyra felt the shift in the room, the turn of their soul songs toward cold obedience. She took a step back, her hand brushing the edge of the stone wall as if searching for escape. Malachi's voice cut like a blade. "Take her to the dungeons. Let her sing to the rats if she must. Here, she will do no more harm." Hands gripped her arms, rough and unyielding. The council's judgment fell like a gavel, final and cruel. Lyra's chest heaved, but she did not resist. She tilted her chin upward, refusing to let them see her break. Yet inside, the shattering of betrayal cut deep. Kaelin's eyes met hers across the chamber. They blazed with fury, with helplessness. He strained against invisible chains, his soul song a storm of defiance caged in silence. Her heart broke at the sight, but she let a faint smile touch her lips, not of surrender, but of promise. The corridor to the dungeon was damp and narrow, torchlight flickering against stone slick with moss. Each step down felt like a descent into the earth's heart, into a place forgotten by light. The guards' boots clanged, but Lyra listened past them, past the noise, searching. And then she heard it. Soft at first, like water dripping through cracks, then fuller, swelling into her mind. The lullaby, the same haunting melody she had hummed to Kaelen, the same thread she had followed since her first night in the citadel, but now it was stronger, resonant, echoing through the stones themselves. Her breath caught. The dungeon should have been silent, filled only with the groans of the forgotten. Yet here, the lullaby poured through the walls as though the castle itself longed to sing. She stumbled slightly, and the guard shoved her forward. She barely felt it. Her ears strained, her heart thrummed with recognition. The lullaby was no longer faint. It was loud, insistent, calling her deeper, guiding her toward a truth hidden beneath layers of deception. As the iron bars closed behind her with a metallic scream, she pressed her hands, and in the silence that followed, the lullaby answered, louder, clearer, more urgent. It was not just a song, it was a call, a key, a weapon. The darkness of the dungeon was not her end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The dungeon air was damp and heavy, thick with mildew and forgotten cries, but Lyra did not feel only stone and shadow. Her world was a living current of sound, and beneath the dripping water, beneath the scurrying of rats, the lullaby beat steady as a heart. She pressed her palm to the wall, her blind eyes tilted upward, whispering to the melody like a prayer. The iron bars clanged open without warning. For a moment, fear tightened her chest, expecting Malachi's hand or the council's wrath. Instead, a low, urgent voice cut through the silence. "Lyra." It was Bren. His soul song was tight, taut with risk, but true. She knew it instantly, even before his hand found hers. The guard captain had always been steady, the rhythm of loyalty woven into every step he took. Yet tonight, that rhythm wavered with rebellion. "What are you doing here?" she breathed, her voice almost swallowed by the dungeon walls. "Saving you before Malachi does worse." His tone was grim, but beneath it, she caught a chord of devotion, not to her alone, but to the king. "I swore to protect Kaelen, not the viper who drains him." The keys rattled, the chains fell away, and Bren guided her out. Their footsteps echoed, but his careful pace softened the sound, each step deliberate. Still, Lyra heard the tremor in his soul. He was risking everything. Through corridors hidden beneath the citadel, Bren led her deeper, past doors no councilman had entered for decades. The air grew colder, the lullaby louder, vibrating through the stones like a trapped cry of anguish. Lyra tightened her grip on Bren's arm. "It's close," she whispered. Bren looked at her, though she could not see the sharp worry in his eyes. "You can hear it, can't you? That cursed thing." "It isn't just a thing," Lyra murmured, her voice reverent, trembling. "It's him, his voice, his power." The tunnels narrowed, the walls dripping with veins of crystal that shimmered faintly, casting ghost light. The sound pressed harder into her skull now, not a gentle lullaby, but a steady, aching pulse. It was alive. It was bound. At last, they reached a cavern beneath the citadel, its ceiling lost in darkness, its heart dominated by a crystal so large it seemed to grow out of the earth itself. It pulsed in rhythm with the lullaby, crimson veins throbbing like arteries, each beat releasing a wave of silence that choked the air. Lyra fell to her knees, her hand hovering near it. The song inside was fragmented, aching, desperate. It was Kaelen's voice, stolen, twisted, trapped. Bren's hand went to his sword. "If this is the source, we destroy it." "No," she said sharply, shaking her head. "Not with steel. This was bound by song. It can only be broken by song." Her throat tightened. She had not sung since childhood, when the accident had scarred her voice and silenced her gift. To hum was one thing, soft and safe. But to sing? To draw out a melody strong enough to counter this cursed silence? It could unmake her. Bren knelt beside her, his calloused hand steady on her shoulder. "Then don't do it alone. Do it for him." Lyra placed her palms on the crystal. It was cold, so cold it burned. She closed her sightless eyes and let the lullaby swell inside her chest. Notes gathered, fragile and quivering, fighting against the weight of fear pressing down. She opened her lips. At first it was faint, a tremor of sound like a candle flame in a storm, but she steadied it, drawing from the memory of her mother's voice, from the memory of Kaelen's shattered song, from the fragment as of hope that had stitched themselves between them. Her melody rose, twining against the lullaby, searching for the seams in the spell, the cracks in the silence. The crystal shuddered, a low hum vibrating through the cavern as if it resented her daring. Sweat beaded on her brow. Her chest ached. The silence pushed back, suffocating, trying to smother her voice before it bloomed. But she sang harder, her notes rough but raw, carrying truth. She felt the chains of the spell tighten, lash out, but she did not falter. The crystal pulsed faster, veins glowing, the cavern trembling around them. The lullaby wailed now, fighting her, but in its cry she heard Kaelen's voice, pleading, yearning, desperate for freedom. Her voice cracked. Pain seared her throat. Still she sang. Bren drew his sword, standing guard, the cavern alive with energy. He saw shadows twist at the edges, dark coils forming, drawn by the breaking spell. He readied himself, and then the air split with a scream that was not hers. From the darkness, Malachi stepped into the cavern, his presence blotting out the fragile light. His eyes burned with fury, his robes fluttering in unseen wind. In his hand, the crystal throbbed brighter, for he had taken it, claimed it, wielded it like a weapon. Lyra's song faltered as she turned her head toward the sound of his footsteps. Malachi's voice coiled around her like poison. "Foolish girl," he spat, his tone silk twisted into venom. "Did you think you could break what I forged? That voice belongs to me, and if you sing again—" He raised the crystal high, its pulse shaking the cavern, drowning the lullaby into screams. "You will die." The cavern roared with a storm of shadows, the crystal in Malachi's hand pulsing like a blackened heart. The walls trembled, dust falling in thin sheets as his stolen power filled every crack of stone and air. Darkness poured out of him, not silence now, but a devouring void, swallowing sound, swallowing breath, swallowing hope. Lyra staggered back, her hands still pressed to the cold floor, her chest burning from the strain of her song. Her voice trembled, faltered, then steadied again, even as the void pressed harder. She sang not from strength but from desperation, every note rough, bloodied but alive. Malachi's laughter slithered through the cavern. It was the laugh of a man who thought himself untouchable, his voice carrying none of the melodies Lyra had learned to hear in others. His was only hunger, only absence. "You cannot fight me, girl. You sing with scraps, and I sing with the silence of kings." But then, through the void, another sound broke. A broken note, cracked and jagged, but real. Kaelen. He appeared from the tunnel's shadows, his body weary, his face pale, but his eyes, those eyes burned like fire through the night. His soul song rang in Lyra's ears, fractured as ever, yet stronger than before. He had heard her call. He had followed her into the heart of the dark. Malachi snarled, "Stay back, my king. You are mine. Your silence is mine." But Kaelen did not stop. His lips parted, and though words would not yet form, a melody emerged, harsh, uneven, but fighting. His voice, the voice that had been caged for years, forced its way out, clashing against Malachi's silence. Lyra's heart swelled. She raised her voice again, their songs weaving together, her melody stitching itself to his broken one. For the first time, two notes, her hum and his shattered cry, aligned. They were not perfect, but they were defiant. The cavern shook harder, the crystal thrumming with violent pulses, as if caught between two masters. Malachi bared his teeth and raised it higher, shadows pouring forth like serpents, slashing toward them. Lyra sang louder, though her throat tore with pain. Kaelen's song cracked, but he pushed harder, every broken note slicing against Malachi's void. Together they built a storm of sound, raw and jagged, but alive. The clash was unbearable. The eye screamed with contradiction, light against dark, song against silence, love against greed. Malachi shouted incantations, his voice a hollow thunder. The shadows whipped around him, twisting into claws and fangs. But every strike that neared Lyra met Kaelen's body, his silent rebellion shielding her, his fractured notes defying the curse. Bren, at the cavern's edge, lifted his sword to strike at Malachi, but the advisor's darkness lashed out, flinging him against the stone. Still, Bren crawled forward, his loyalty unwavering, his presence another rhythm pulsing beneath the chaos. Lyra's breath caught, her vision blurred though she had no sight, her strength dwindling with every note. She sang until blood traced her lips, until her chest ached with fire. She sang because Kaelen's melody was answering her, because she had finally found the thread that bound him. The crystal cracked. A jagged fissure split down its center, bleeding light and shadow in equal measure. Malachi screamed, his hold slipping, his power fraying. He turned his fury on Lyra, his voice lashing out like a whip. "You will die before I let him go." The shadows struck her. Her song broke. Her knees buckled as pain racked her body. She collapsed, her breath ragged, her voice nothing more than a hoarse whisper. The cavern spun, her song slipping from her like water through trembling hands. But Kaelen caught her before she struck the ground. His arms wrapped around her, his broken melody vibrating through her skin. She could feel his fury, his grief, his love. She could feel the storm inside him straining to burst free. Malachi raised the crystal one last time, its glow sickly, its silence shrieking. And then, Kaelen's eyes ignited, blazing brighter than any flame. His lips parted, and the silence that had chained him shattered. His voice, deep and commanding, thundered into the cavern. One word, enough. The word tore through the chamber like thunder splitting stone. Enough. The sound was not merely a voice. It was a storm unchained, a tide rushing back into the hollow places that had been stolen. Kaelen's words shattered the silence like glass under fire. The cursed crystal in Malachi's hand trembled violently, its glow faltering, as though the spell itself feared the sound of its master. The air rippled, walls quaked with the force of his return. Lyra, collapsed and trembling, felt the vibration ripple through her bones, through her very soul. Her lungs, too weak to summon another note, filled instead with the resonance of his voice. For the first time, she heard him not as a broken echo, but as the Alpha King he was born to be. Malachi staggered, shadows curling desperately around him, clutching for dominance. "No," he hissed, voice cracking, no longer commanding, but begging. The silence he wielded began to unravel, strands snapping like threads against the gale of Kaelen's awakening. The crystal screamed. It was not a sound meant for mortal ears. It was the death cry of stolen power breaking apart. Kaelen stepped forward, his frame trembling with exhaustion, yet his aura swelling larger, brighter, stronger. His eyes blazed with fury and freedom both. "You bound me," he growled, his voice low but resonant. "But you could never silence what was mine." The throne room itself shook as his words echoed, alive with the raw pulse of magic. Malachi tried to lift the crystal, but it slipped from his grasp, searing his hands with the very power he had drained. The shadows recoiled from him, no longer allies, but executioners. Kaelen extended his hand toward the fallen stone. It rose, spinning wildly, shards of stolen song spiraling out of it in bursts of light. The pack, gathered outside the broken hall, pressed closer, gasping at the sight of their king reborn. Lyra forced her eyes open, weak but desperate, her heart aching with hope. She whispered his name, though her voice was barely a breath. "Kaelen." "And," he heard. He turned to her, not as a ghost of himself, but whole, sovereign, unshackled. Her name poured from his lips, rich and commanding, as though he had carried it in silence for eternity only to release it now. "Lyra." She sobbed, for the sound of her name and his voice was the greatest gift she had ever known. Malachi screamed then, a shriek of rage and terror. The silence he had woven surged upward, trying to smother the storm. But it betrayed him. It devoured him. The shadows collapsed inward, wrapping his body in the very void he had once commanded. His scream was cut short, swallowed whole, until nothing remained but dust and the faint hiss of broken magic. The crystal shattered, scattering like falling stars across the stones. The curse was gone. Kaelen's power rushed back in a flood of sound. Winds whipped through the chamber, carrying the remnants of song and silence alike, cleansing, freeing. Lyra shielded her face, her body frail, but she felt the warmth of it brush her skin like dawn. Then silence returned. Not Malachi's silence, but a stillness that followed storms, calm and sacred. And in that silence, Kaelen crossed the distance to her. He knelt, not as king, but as man. He touched her hand, rough fingers trembling as though afraid she might vanish. Her breath hitched, her lips trembling. Your voice," she tried, but could not finish. He silenced her gently, not with magic, but with his truth. "You gave it back to me," he said, his voice fierce, unbroken, whole. "You sang when I could not. You fought when I was chained. Lyra, you freed me." Her tears spilled, her blindness shimmering in the light of his presence. Yet her soul saw him clearer than sight ever could. "You were never meant to be a servant," he continued, his tone rising, meant for more than her alone. The pack had gathered now, eyes wide, hearts pounding, watching their alpha reborn. "You are my equal, my strength, my song." He rose, lifting her with him, cradling her frail body as though she weighed nothing at all. Gas, P.S. echoed through the hall. Whispers of witch and curse melted away, replaced by awe, by reverence. He turned to his people, his voice filling every corner of the ruined citadel. "This woman," he declared, "is not my servant. She is not my captive. She is my mate." The words rang out like prophecy, undeniable, eternal. The pack bowed their heads, silence giving way to acceptance, to allegiance, and then he did what no Alpha King had ever done before. He bent, pressing his forehead to hers, before the eyes of all. Lyra's heart raced, her breath shallow, as he lifted her hand high for all to see. The blind Omega, mocked, scorned, discarded, stood as their queen. Her chest rose with a sob, yet her lips curved with trembling joy. He leaned close, so only she could hear, though the world strained to listen. "You gave me back my voice," he whispered, the words breaking and mending her all at once. "Now I will be yours, forever." And with that vow, spoken not as king but as man, the storm settled. The citadel no longer a prison, but a throne. The silence no longer a curse but peace. And their song, their shared song, was just beginning.